The courtroom is quiet. Too quiet. A quill scratches faintly across parchment. There's the delicate creak of wood beneath someone's anxious seat shift. And then, there it is, the rustle of goat hair. Powdered, curled, perched atop the head of a very serious British judge who, it must be said, looks like he's about to either deliver a verdict or host a Baroque dinner party. You're in England, somewhere between the late 1600s and the early 1800s. The exact year doesn't matter much. Judges were wearing wigs for over a century, and frankly, they didn't change much. You step carefully across the stone floor, the echo of your soft-soled shoes sounding louder than expected. The air smells faintly of dust, ink, and what can only be described as historical self-importance. Before you even sit down, a gentle warning. You probably won't make it through this day. It's not dangerous, just excruciatingly ceremonial. Things move slower than a goat at tea time. But don't worry, we'll drift through it together. If this is your kind of pace, soft, peculiar, and powdered, feel free to like and subscribe. Whisper your location and your local time into the comments if you're still awake by the end. Or don't. The algorithm is very understanding. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. The man at the bench, let's call him Lord Fotheringham for dramatic effect, clears his throat. His wig, made entirely of bleached goat hair and lightly dusted with powder, does not move. It remains perfectly still, like a sleeping pet or a particularly quiet cloud. The style is called the full-bottomed wig. And yes, it's exactly as silly-looking as it sounds. But in this courtroom, it is a symbol of gravitas, authority, and possibly dandruff. The year is 1701. King William III is still hanging on. Parliament is a daily theater of bickering, and you're just a fly on the oak-paneled wall of the Old Bailey. A criminal trial is about to begin, and while the details of the case are long lost to time, the fashion, unfortunately, is not. One major historical fact. British judges began wearing wigs in the 1680s, adopting the French court style that had spread like a powdered pandemic through the elite. It wasn't about hiding baldness or head lice, as some have suggested, though that was a convenient side effect. It was about status, refinement, a polite way of saying, I am above you and also possibly French. You listen to the prosecutor drone on. His wig is less impressive than the judge's, shorter, neater, more practical. There are levels to this wig game, you see. Judges get the grand, theatrical ones. Barristers wear what's called a tie wig, with little tails dangling behind like forgotten shoelaces. The curls are stiff and oddly satisfying to look at, like someone ironed a ramen noodle packet and pinned it to their scalp. An obscure cultural tidbit. During this period, wigs were often scented to mask the smell of city life. Lavender, bergamot, or even cinnamon was dabbed onto goat hair, because nothing says justice like smelling vaguely like a winter candle. Outside, the streets of London are coated in grime and gossip. Inside, the courtroom hums with the illusion of order. And yet, historians still debate whether the wigs were originally adopted purely out of fashion or as a legal tradition borrowed from ecclesiastical robes. Was it style, symbolism, or just peer pressure with better tailoring? You take a seat on a creaky bench beside a woman with a bonnet so wide you're pretty sure it has its own gravitational pull. She glances at you, then back at the proceedings, unimpressed. That's fair. Nothing particularly exciting is happening. Just a lot of parchment rustling and formal sighing. The law, like goat hair, has a tendency to get tangled. Outside, you hear a street crier yell something about pears. The world continues, indifferent to powdered justice. The judge finally speaks, his voice like molasses over gravel. Slow, inevitable, entirely confident that everyone has all the time in the world. He adjusts his wig slightly, a rare, intimate gesture, and for a moment, he's just a man with itchy ears under an 8-pound coil of fashion. You lean back, let your eyes drift. The candlelight flickers softly across the velvet robes. Dust particles float like sleepy fairies. Someone sneezes, delicately, and you wonder, what happens when the goat hair starts shedding? Is there a little courtroom broom just for stray curls? But no one answers, and the trial continues. Softly, very softly. You're walking now, slowly, along the edge of Fleet Street. It's 1701 still, and the afternoon light has dipped into that gold honey sort of haze that makes even coal smoke look charming. Behind you, the courthouse. Ahead of you, wig shops. Yes, entire shops. Just for wigs. It's not a side business, it's an empire. Powdered, curled, and clipped with obsessive pride. You pass one on the left. Its window features a trio of styrofoam heads, or at least their 18th century equivalents, each wearing a different style of wig. There's the coachman for more casual barristers, the bob for the practical gentleman, and of course, the iconic full-bottomed monstrosity for judges who want to look like a cross between Zeus and a sleeping lion. The bell over the door jingles softly as you step inside. The air smells like talc, lavender, and pride. A man with ink-stained fingers and suspiciously powdery shoulders looks up. He nods once, then goes back to combing goat hair into tight spirals. Here's your major historical fact for this evening stroll. Judges continued wearing wigs in court well into the 20th century, though by the 1870s, most everyday folks had dropped them like last year's fashion scandal. But judges? Oh, they clung. Because tradition never goes out of style, unless Parliament says otherwise. You linger near the counter, running your fingers across a row of wigs like you're browsing vinyl records. Each one is labeled by size, style, and somewhat dramatically moral weight. A large, curly number reads, Justice, Eternal, and Aloof. Another simply says, For Thursday hearings only. Obscure cultural tidbit. The goats whose hair was most prized for wigs often came from the Alps or the Caucasus. Their hair was soft, pale, and highly cooperative in the art of aesthetic deception. Somewhere, a mountain goat lived a peaceful life so its fur could one day sit in judgment of petty theft cases in London. There's a soft clink of coin as a man in a navy coat pays for a fresh wig. His old one, visibly deflated, is tied up in brown paper and handed back to him like a dry-cleaned memory. He tucks the new one under his arm and walks out into the soot-dusted dusk. The shopkeeper turns to you, eyes narrowed. You look like a barrister, he says, not entirely convincingly. You smile vaguely, pretending you have an appointment at the Old Bailey and not, in fact, a 15-minute nap planned under a yew tree. Historians still debate whether the wigs offered any true legal symbolism or were simply performative peacocking. There's no consensus, but let's be honest, if you're dressing like a sheep-themed chandelier to say, guilty, you're probably not doing it for minimalism. Back on the street, twilight settles in like a tired dog. The gas lamps are being lit. One by one, flames flicker into bloom. You walk past an apprentice tossing wig powder out a second-story window. It floats down like snow or dandruff, depending on your mood. The courthouse bell chimes the hour, long and slow. A group of barristers passes you in conversation, their wigs wobbling with each gestured opinion. One of them laughs, and for a moment, you could swear you're watching a flock of stern sheep debate maritime law. You pass the alley behind the courthouse. There's a faint scent of burnt bread and wet parchment. Remember that judge from earlier? He's just gone home, doffing his wig like a knight laying down his helmet. His hair underneath is matted, flattened, gloriously unimpressive. You stop, breathe. The night feels gentle, somehow. Goat hair, powdered dignity, and all. And the best part? There's still so much more wig history to unravel. Softly, very softly, the morning fog clings low to the cobblestones, draping London in a soft gray curtain that smells faintly of coal smoke, cabbage, and a city that takes itself very seriously before breakfast. You're awake earlier than most. Congratulations or condolences, and wandering your way toward Westminster Hall. The year is 1725 now. Nothing earth-shattering is happening. No rebellions in the streets or duels at dawn. Just an ordinary Tuesday in the legal world, which, as it turns out, is exactly the sort of thing that requires a heavy wig and an even heavier expression of importance. A judge sweeps past you. His robes rustle like offended curtains, and his wig today is particularly majestic, perhaps recently curled. There's a fresh hint of orris root powder trailing behind him, which is basically 18th century cologne made from powdered iris root. It smells faintly like old libraries and upper-class denial. Today, you're here not for a trial, but for a ceremony, a call to the bar. A new generation of barristers is about to be sworn in, and they are nervous, excited, and very, very itchy. One major historical fact. Becoming a barrister in England required joining one of the 4 Inns of Court Greys in Lincoln's Inn, Inner Temple, or Middle Temple. These were more than schools. They were half law society, half fraternity, and entirely convinced of their own mystical gravitas. You stroll into Middle Temple Hall, a vast, echoing space where wood-paneled walls have heard centuries of politely muttered ambition. The ceiling beams are thick enough to hide a small goat, which feels symbolic somehow. You spot the new barristers fidgeting in their stiff robes, adjusting their freshly powdered wigs, trying to look serious while fighting the urge to scratch. An obscure cultural tidbit. It wasn't uncommon for wig powder to get into the eyes, mouth, or, worse, one's tea. There were even reports of sneezing fits during solemn oaths. One poor soul famously ruined his own swearing in by erupting into a powder-induced coughing fit. Legal dignity is a fragile thing. You settle into a bench. The ceremony begins with Latin mutterings and ceremonial nods. A toast is made, quietly, with sherry. The wigless are applauded. The wigged are admired. Somewhere, someone hiccups with stress. Historians still debate whether the traditions of the Inns of Court helped democratize the law or reinforce an elitist hierarchy dressed up in goat hair and Latin phrases. It's possible it was both. Like most things in British history, earnest progress often traveled by carriage with inherited absurdity. You glance at one of the young barristers. His wig is slightly crooked, like it's trying to make a break for it. He straightens it with a twitchy hand and tries to look composed. His name, you overhear, is Thomas. He's been practicing legal arguments in the mirror for weeks. And yet, he can't help but wonder if the real test of his career will be learning to wear this itchy mop with grace. Outside, a horse snorts. A carriage clatters past. Life goes on indifferently. 3 light jokes ripple through the scene. A senior judge leans toward another and whispers, "He's got the look of a barrister." That is, no sense of fashion and far too many opinions. Someone sneezes during the reading of the oath. The wig stays perfectly still, as if judging the sneeze. A student in the back is overheard muttering, "I went to law school for 7 years, to dress like a ghost's hairdresser." The ceremony ends with applause polite enough not to disturb the dust. The new barristers file out into the morning light, where pigeons blink at them with the cool disinterest only pigeons can manage. You follow slowly, your steps soft on the flagstones, as the wigs return to the street like powdered clouds marching toward uncertain destinies. Afternoon finds you in a quiet pub off Chancery Lane, a narrow place called the Crown and Goat. The sign outside shows a very serious goat wearing, of course, a powdered wig. You can't help but admire the commitment to the theme. Inside, the room glows with amber light. There's a gentle clink of tankards, the murmur of low conversation, and the faint smell of beef stew clinging to the beams. You slide into a corner booth with a view of the street and a copy of the Daily Courant, the first regular English newspaper, folded beside your pint. You're not here for news, though. You're here to listen, because this is where the off-duty barristers go. And when men drink with goat hair on their heads, interesting things are said. A pair of junior lawyers sit nearby, already a pint deep. Their wigs are perched on hooks behind them, looking oddly judgmental without heads to sit on. One of the men, his name's Edward or possibly Edwin, is ranting about courtroom ventilation. "No air," he huffs. "And the powder. I inhaled half my own wig today." A subtle, shared truth of the time. No one really liked wearing the wigs. But tradition is the strongest force in Britain, just ahead of weather complaints. One major historical fact. In 1822, judges were allowed to stop wearing the full-bottomed wigs outside ceremonial occasions. They switched to smaller bench wigs, which were lighter, shorter, and less likely to cause vertebral regret. It was the legal equivalent of going from evening ball gown to business casual. Obscure cultural tidbit. Some wigs were made not of goat hair, but of horsehair, coarser, darker, and generally considered a downgrade. Horsehair wigs didn't hold a curl as well, but they were cheaper and harder to stain with wine, which made them a favorite of barristers who drank more than they argued. You take a sip of your drink. The clock ticks softly above the bar. You wonder idly how many court decisions were influenced by wig discomfort. How many judges were simply too itchy to be merciful. Historians still debate whether the persistence of wig wearing in Britain reflects a deeper need for ritual, or simply a national reluctance to change anything that isn't on fire. There's no agreement. There's never agreement. That's half the fun of being a historian. 3 light jokes drift through the pub air. One barrister to another. They say the wig symbolizes impartiality. I say it symbolizes my last haircut being in 1697. If I wanted to spend my life in stiff robes surrounded by pompous men, I'd have joined the clergy. One man mutters. A judge enters. Everyone goes quiet. Then someone whispers, "That's not powdered lavender. It's anxiety." You sit back. The fire in the hearth crackles softly. The beer is warm, but not unpleasant. The wigs continue to hang like curious creatures waiting to be reanimated. And somewhere, outside in the fog, a clerk delivers a summons by hand, like a dusty carrier pigeon of justice. Evening approaches. The world softens, and the goat hair saga continues. Evening slides into London like a cat that knows exactly where it's going and refuses to explain itself. The street lamps flicker into their warm, unreliable glow. Candlelight twinkles in the high windows of the Inns of Court. The fog has thickened, carrying with it the scent of wet stone, tobacco, and something slightly burnt. Possibly dinner, possibly decorum. You're walking again, back toward Lincoln's Inn Fields. Your boots click quietly on the cobbles. A clerk passes you, arms full of ledgers and an expression that suggests he hasn't slept since the Glorious Revolution. He nods. You nod. It's a language older than law. Tonight, you're slipping into a different part of the legal world. Not the courtroom, but the dressing room behind it. You duck through a side entrance near a cluster of wigmakers' shops and find yourself in a barrister's robing room. Part lounge, part powder station, part existential crisis staging area. This is where the transformation happens, where ordinary men become legal demigods with the help of stiff collars and hair that never grew on their heads. You sit quietly on a bench, taking it all in. One major historical fact. By the 18th century, legal wigs weren't just fashion statements. They were regulated. Specific styles were assigned to specific roles. Judges, barristers, clerks, all had their own wig codes. Wearing the wrong wig was the legal equivalent of turning up to a funeral in beachwear. Not illegal, but absolutely unforgivable. You watch a young clerk fuss with a pair of curling tongs, coaxing a barrister's wig into shape with the same care some reserve for bonsai trees. A bowl of starch water sits nearby, next to a brush that has clearly seen too many emergencies. An obscure cultural tidbit. Some wigs had hidden ribbons inside to secure them during windy coach rides or sudden legal objections. These were sometimes color-coded by a secret splash of identity in an otherwise colorless world. A touch of flair, hidden under layers of powdered conformity. Over in the corner, an older barrister sighs deeply as he pulls on his robe. My wig's gotten flatter than a toast rack, he mutters. Another replies without looking up, just like your arguments. It's a ritual as old as cross-examination. Grumbling, grooming, and the mildest forms of emotional support. Historians still debate whether the robing room culture helped foster camaraderie or simply reinforced the insular boys' club mentality of early legal society. The truth, as usual, likely sits uncomfortably between the coat hooks. 3 light jokes trail through the air like smoke. One barrister lifts his wig and says, I swear this one used to have a left side. Another, holding up his robe, do you think this stain counts as precedent? Someone sneezes into a wig brush and immediately tries to pretend it didn't happen. It absolutely did. Outside, the bell of St. Dunstan in the west chimes. Time to return to court. You walk with them now, the barristers and judges. A slow procession of walking wigs and quiet egos. They adjust their curls, square their shoulders, and mentally rehearse their objections. You can almost hear the starch cracking. As you pass through the archway into the Old Bailey, the cold stone seems to hum with history. You remember the wigs on their hooks, the whispered jokes, the ribbons no one else sees, and you realize these aren't just costumes. They're rituals, they're armor, they're little powdered ghosts of authority in a world that constantly changes its laws but never its wardrobe. Softly, very softly, the courtroom again. But now it's late, Past dinner, the hour when shadows stretch longer than most patience. The torches along the walls burn low, casting a flickering amber glow on the high bench. The judge sits like a statue of himself, unmoving, monumental, and mildly bored. You find your seat quietly, unnoticed by the gallery, and observe the closing arguments of a case that began before lunch. The defendant yawns discreetly behind a handkerchief. The barrister drones on in the tone of a man who has memorized every syllable but understands none of them emotionally. But you're here for the spectacle, the quiet, powdered theater of English justice. One major historical fact: despite their ceremonial origins, wigs were fiercely defended during periods of attempted reform. In 1834, Lord Brougham, known for his radical streak, suggested scrapping the wig entirely. The reaction from the legal community was swift and horrified. A judge was overheard saying, "Next they'll be suggesting we try cases without Latin. Some things are sacred. Goat hair apparently is one of them." Across the aisle, you see a junior barrister nervously fingering the edge of his robe. His wig is slightly too large, a hand-me-down from a cousin. It slips down over his eyebrows when he leans forward. Every time he speaks, he has to push it back like a sheepish curtain. Obscure cultural tidbit: some barristers would use beeswax to stiffen the curls of their wigs before court. This led to occasional unfortunate accidents in summer, when the wax would melt slightly, sending curls wilting in slow, tragic defeat. One judge's wig allegedly drooped so low mid-sentence that the court clerk began crying with laughter. The judge finally speaks. His voice echoes across the chamber like a kettle about to boil. He delivers his verdict with the slow, deliberate cadence of someone who believes every word will be carved into stone, possibly by goats. Historians still debate whether the performative gravity of British courts served true justice or simply created a theater of power. Did the wig represent impartiality, or was it a distraction from the privilege beneath? Three gentle jokes drift through the courtroom like forgotten footnotes. A barrister whispers to his client, "Don't worry. His lordship's wig is fluffier than his argument." The judge pauses, clearly losing his place in the parchment. "Where was I?" he murmurs. Someone mutters, 1742. The clerk reads a name from the docket, mispronouncing it spectacularly. The defendant sighs and corrects him, twice. As the trial wraps up, the court empties like a kettle finally poured. The judge rises, smoothing his robes. He doesn't remove the wig yet, that comes in private. That moment of disarmament, saved for quiet chambers and wig boxes lined with velvet. You step outside again. The air is cooler now, the stars stubbornly peeking through the soot-hazed sky. Your breath fogs faintly. Somewhere in the distance, a carriage will squeaks. The city doesn't sleep. It dozes, and the wigs, tucked away in their lacquered boxes, dream of curls and justice. Softly, very softly, you wake, or rather drift back into awareness, in a small, narrow attic above a barrister's lodgings. It's late, or early, or possibly both, depending on how flexible you are with time. Rain taps gently on the roof, and somewhere below, a mouse is having a spirited legal debate with a wedge of cheese. The wig is there. Of course it is. Sitting on its wooden stand, staring blankly into the darkness like a powdered sentinel. You walk over to it. It doesn't blink. It doesn't need to. It's seen things. Centuries of them. Below, a candle burns in the barrister's chamber. You descend the narrow stairs, slow enough to hear each board complain. He's still awake. Thomas, the nervous young man from earlier. He's poring over a leather-bound volume, a cup of black tea gone cold beside him. His robe is draped over a chair like a sleeping cat. His wig rests nearby, powdered and slightly deflated, as if exhausted by the sheer weight of expectations. One major historical fact. By the Victorian era, wigs were still required in most English courts, but growing pressure was mounting for reform. The 1850s saw a flurry of legal modernization, but wigs remained untouched, as if protected by an invisible clause that read, "Do not tamper with the curls." Thomas sighs. You watch as he writes out arguments longhand, scratching away with a steel nib pen, ink smudged on his cuff. He mouths the words as he writes them, trying them on like a new pair of shoes. They pinch. Obscure cultural tidbit. Some barristers had their wigs named. Not publicly, of course, this was still England, but privately and often with great affection. There are records of wigs called Justice Jemima, the Persuader, and even Old Reliable. One man allegedly left his entire wig collection to his cat. Thomas scratches at his temple and glances at the wig. He mutters, "You're not helping," and turns back to his book. The wig says nothing, as usual. Historians still debate whether the long hours of legal preparation in candlelit chambers like this one made for better justice, or simply better insomnia. There is little evidence to support either theory, though records do show a startlingly high rate of tea consumption and stress-induced poetry among barristers. 3 light jokes hover in the lamplight. Thomas, reading his own draft, that's either a brilliant argument or a recipe for boiled turnips. A note scrawled in the margin. Remember to sound confident, even if the wig falls off. A moth flutters near the wig stand, pauses, then retreats in what looks suspiciously like disappointment. The candle flickers. Rain taps the window. The city's muffled sounds press close. Hoofbeats, laughter, the soft call of a night watchman who's mostly just shouting to stay awake. Thomas closes the book. He places the wig back on its stand with something resembling reverence. Then, slowly, he curls up on the chaise near the fire, robe as blanket, dreams full of Latin and powdered responsibility. You sit for a while longer, watching the shadows stretch and sigh. The wig gleams faintly in the firelight, proud and absurd. Softly, very softly, morning arrives with theatrical indifference. The light pours in too bright, too sudden, like a court clerk with no concept of subtlety. Outside, the city coughs itself awake. Clattering wheels, barking dogs, the distant cry of a fishmonger already arguing with someone. You're in the temple gardens now. A small pocket of green, squashed between stone buildings and centuries of legal ego. The trees here are old. The gravel paths are tidy, and the benches are full of barristers pretending to read for work while actually just avoiding court. One major historical fact: even as wigs became controversial symbols of privilege in the 19th century, they remained an essential part of court decorum in England and Wales. Magistrates and judges defended them as tools of impartiality, a visual barrier, they said, between personal identity and judicial duty, because nothing says emotional neutrality like goat hair. You spot Thomas on a bench, the same one from the wig-staring vigil. He's got a bundle of papers in his lap and a sandwich he hasn't eaten. His wig sits in a hat box beside him, sulking quietly. He looks tired but upright, like a man whose self-doubt has briefly taken a tea break. Obscure cultural tidbit. Wigs were so integral to court life that there were emergency services to restore them. A wig dresser could be summoned to chambers to recurl, repowder, or revive a drooping fringe before a critical case. These unsung artisans were known in whispers as hair surgeons or curlsmiths. Thomas stands. You walk with him now through the cloisters, past carved stone archways and windows that haven't opened since Charles II decided lace was masculine. Other barristers nod at him, small, silent salutes. One of them winks at the hat box and murmurs, "Traveling with counsel, I see." Historians still debate whether these physical trappings, the wigs, the robes, the legal theater, truly separated law from emotion or simply distracted from it. Some argue the wig gave courage to those who had none. Others say it hid fear too well. Three light jokes echo under the arches. Thomas, adjusting his collar, "If I lose this case, it'll be due to improper starch ratios." Another barrister, "They say we wear wigs to appear wiser. Mine makes me look like a sheep that passed the bar." A clerk, passing by, "Careful, sir, your dignity's showing. Tuck it under the curls." You arrive at court. Today it's a small matter, land boundaries and livestock. But the room is still solemn, still full of parchment and posturing. Thomas takes his place. His voice doesn't shake much. You watch the judge enter, robed, wigged, half asleep. The courtroom smells of damp wool and old decisions. A woman in the back row knits through the opening statements. A child outside calls to a dog, who doesn't listen. The trial begins, and the wigs resume their quiet performance. Softly, very softly, the trial unfolds like a play written by someone who only half believes in conflict. It's a dispute over a pig, a fence, and a tree that may or may not have existed during the reign of Queen Anne. You sit near the back, watching Thomas deliver his argument with the mild panic of someone who's realized mid-sentence that they may be quoting the wrong Latin case. But the wig holds firm. It does what wigs do best, make people look slightly more important than they feel. It frames Thomas's nervous face like a powdered question mark. One major historical fact. While wigs were gradually phased out in many parts of British society, their role in the courtroom remained oddly resilient. Even colonial courts, from India to the Caribbean, adopted them as signs of legal authority. A man standing under the sun in Calcutta, sweating through layers of wool and goat hair, was still expected to look neutral and wise. Obscure cultural tidbit. To maintain their wigs in tropical colonies, some British judges kept small, netted wig cages for transport, wooden boxes with slatted sides and lavender sachets inside. These boxes were sometimes carried by servants with more caution than actual court documents. Back in the courtroom, the witness is explaining, at length, the direction the pig ran. There is disagreement about whether it squealed before or after knocking over the disputed fence. The judge rubs his temples beneath his wig, which you suspect is now more familiar with headaches than law. Thomas asks a question. The witness replies, "I don't recall." This happens 8 more times in different phrasings. The courtroom shifts collectively in its seats like an orchestra of slow discomfort. Historians still debate whether courtroom wigs enhanced credibility or merely distracted from it. Some contemporaries argued they gave barristers and judges a mask of objectivity. Others pointed out, not incorrectly, that a man with curls above his ears and sweat beneath his collar is still very much a man. 3 gentle jokes ripple through the trial. The witness squints at Thomas and says, "I'd trust you more if you weren't dressed like a wedding cake." The judge, exasperated, mutters, "Is the pig on trial, or are we?" A clerk fumbles the docket, spilling papers. A barrister whispers, "It's all right, none of it's legible anyway." The court recesses. You step outside. The sky is the color of wet parchment, and a crow shouts legal advice at no one in particular. Thomas slumps on a bench and pulls off his wig. Underneath, his hair is flat in a way that suggests compromise with time and powder. He looks at you, or maybe through you, and sighs. "I knew I should have cited Blackstone." You sit beside him. The wind stirs the hem of his robe. Across the square, another barrister walks past with a wig box tucked under one arm and a meat pie in the other. Balance. The courthouse clock chimes once. Not a call to arms, just a gentle reminder that even powdered justice has lunch breaks. The afternoon slides forward like a judge descending from the bench, slow, deliberate, mildly theatrical. You follow Thomas down Chancery Lane, the heart of London's legal district, where the cobblestones remember more legal arguments than most people do their own birthdays. He's not going back to court. Not yet. He's headed to see his wig maker. Yes, that's still a thing. In 1861, even now, with railways shrieking through the countryside and gaslight giving way to electric flickers, someone must still curl the goat hair. One major historical fact. The most famous wigmaker of the era was Ede and Ravenscroft, established in 1689 and still curling on into the future. They supplied robes and wigs to judges, barristers, and sometimes even bishops. Their clientele list reads like a very formal soap opera. You arrive at the shop. The bell over the door rings like a powdered chime. Inside, the scent of starch, tobacco, and lavender hangs heavy in the air. Wigs line the walls in glass-fronted cabinets, as if being stored for the apocalypse, or a particularly judgmental parade. The shopkeeper, Mr. Dimsley, a man who appears to have been born wearing a cravat, greets Thomas with a nod so slow it could be mistaken for disapproval. "Back for the touch-up, sir?" he asks, already reaching for a box labeled T. Linton-esque. Obscure cultural tidbit. Wigs weren't just cleaned, they were refreshed. Curlers would heat iron rods and carefully retwist the strands, using starch or sugar water to set them. More expensive wigs received dustings of orris root or even crushed pearl. The legal world smelled faintly of florals, and maybe just a hint of scorched ambition. Thomas explains, sheepishly, that he thinks the left side is listing. Mr. Dimsley nods gravely. "A left-leaning curl," he says. "Dangerous for impartiality." He takes the wig into the back room, where the curling tongs live. You browse. Historians still debate whether the persistence of such elaborate maintenance rituals reflected true respect for tradition, or simply a deep national discomfort with changing anything older than one's grandfather. The answer, as ever, is powdered. You overhear Mr. Dimsley talking to his apprentice. "Don't let the starch clump again. Last time it crackled like a bonfire when he bowed. Always curl clockwise. Counterclockwise makes them look argumentative. And for heaven's sake, dust it this time, not smother it." You lean over the counter and spot a catalog, Styles of Legal Wigs for the Serious Gentleman. Inside, the full bottom, for ceremonial law lords, the bench wig, shorter, for sitting judges, and the bar wig, short, tight, and alarmingly aggressive. Mr. Dimsley returns with the refreshed wig. It sparkles faintly in the sunlight, unervingly regal for something shaped like an antique muffin. Thomas thanks him, pays in coins that jingle apologetically, and tucks the wig into its case. Outside again, the world is just a little louder. The law marches on, stiff and powdered and oddly fragrant. You follow quietly, a shadow among wigs. Softly, very softly, you follow Thomas back into the afternoon traffic of London. If traffic can describe a sluggish parade of carts, street sweepers, loafers, and one highly opinionated goose. The wig box under his arm swings gently with each step, like a pendulum counting down to his next courtroom performance. The sun leans low, casting long shadows across Fleet Street, turning every chimney into a sundial. You pause at a corner, just in time to watch a child point at Thomas and ask, "Why's that man carrying a hat for a ghost?" Fair question. One major historical fact. By the late 19th century, the debate over wigs in the legal profession had spilled into public discourse. Newspapers printed editorials both mocking and defending the tradition. Punch magazine ran several cartoons lampooning the wigs as highly flammable halos of absurdity. Still, the wigs endured, stubborn, ceremonial, and oddly endearing. Thomas doesn't respond to the ghost hat comment. He's focused. He has a hearing in 30 minutes and a page of notes he's already forgotten. You trail him to a smaller courtroom, quieter and more intimate than the grand halls of the Old Bailey. Here, legal matters are more delicate, disputes over inheritances, trusts, or the precise ownership of hedges. Obscure cultural tidbit. There were unwritten rules about when to powder a wig. Too much powder in a cramped courtroom was considered a social faux pas. Judges could and would glare. Conversely, too little powder implied haste, sloppiness, or worse, modern thinking. One unlucky clerk earned the nickname Bald Charlie after turning up in an unpowdered wig. He never lived it down, despite having a full head of hair beneath. Inside the courtroom, the judge nods to Thomas. "Mr. Linton," he says, one eyebrow arched, either in welcome or concern. Thomas bows, elegant in form, frantic in soul. Historians still debate whether courtroom formality genuinely enhanced the quality of justice or simply turned each trial into a one-act play with poor lighting. Many barristers considered the performance aspect essential. Others simply liked having something to hide behind when the facts got slippery. The judge adjusts his bench wig with both hands, as if steadying a ship before a storm. Thomas begins. 3 soft jokes slip through the chamber air. The opposing barrister's wig has developed a comical lean. Someone whispers, "His argument's as crooked as his parting." A spectator sneezes. The judge pauses mid-sentence, then continues as though personally offended by pollen. Thomas fumbles a phrase and says, "As per Lord Sandwich's opinion." There is a pause. The judge mutters, "Do you mean Lord Mansfield?" Thomas turns faintly pink. Still, the hearing continues. Papers rustle. Pens scratch. The room smells of damp wood and silent stress. Outside, the goose from earlier honks in triumph. The judge finally delivers a short ruling. Not dramatic, not life-changing. just a gentle decision in a small case on a fading day. As Thomas bows again and gathers his things, you notice something. The wig fits better now. Or maybe he's just growing into it. Softly, very softly. Dusk now. The city is mellow, soot-colored, and squinting toward dinner. You walk with Thomas toward Holborn, past shops shuttering for the evening and street lamps flickering into nervous life. The wig is safely back in its case. The robe is folded. And Thomas, well, he looks like a man who survived a minor duel with decorum. You stop at a tavern tucked between two bookshops, its sign swinging in the breeze. The silken curl, subtle. Inside, it's warm and dim, with the buzz of barristers off duty. A fire pops cheerfully in the grate. The air smells of meat pie, beer, and the quiet relief of not having to argue anymore. One major historical fact. Even well into the 1900s, legal wigs in the UK remained untouched by major reform. It wasn't until 2007 that the Lord Chief Justice ruled they were no longer required in civil and family courts. Criminal courts, however, still held firm. Because sometimes you just need curls to feel like justice. You find a corner booth. Thomas orders food without looking at the menu. He's been here before. So have the dozen others scattered throughout the room, all in various stages of wig-induced fatigue. Some talk shop. Others just sip their drinks in comfortable silence. Obscure cultural tidbit. Some barristers kept miniature silver brushes specifically for wig maintenance. These dainty combs were often gifted upon passing the bar, engraved with initials, Latin phrases, or, in one recorded case, "Try not to cry." At a nearby table, a lively debate arises, not about law, but about who has the most uncomfortable robe. One man insists his is lined with something like nettles and regret. Another swears his wig whispers curses when he walks uphill. Thomas eats. Slowly. He listens more than he speaks. But now and then, he smiles in that tired, barely there way of someone who's too worn out to celebrate but too proud not to enjoy the silence. Historians still debate whether legal dress codes served a practical function or simply preserved the illusion of authority. One thing's certain. The man who forgets his wig earns more attention than the one who forgets his case notes. 3 light jokes settle into the booth like old friends. A barrister lifts his mug and toasts. To wigs. May they stay powdered even if we don't. Someone near the hearth mutters. I tried to iron my robe once. Nearly invented fire law. A junior barrister stares at his empty plate and sighs. I spent 4 years in training to be out-argued by a man named Percival. The night deepens. Laughter quiets. The tavern becomes a nest of flickering lamplight and drowsy conversations. Thomas leans back, full and faintly content. His wig box sits beside him, silent and oddly dignified. You rest your eyes, just for a moment. Outside, the fog gathers again, soft as dust and just as hard to sweep away. London turns inward, sleepward, and the wigs, in their cases, wait for morning. Softly, very softly, the fog curls thicker the next morning, like the city is exhaling a particularly thoughtful dream. You follow Thomas once more, but today his pace is slower. He's not rushing to court. There's no case to argue.
No big dispute.
No fence to defend. Today is ceremonial. He's attending a retirement procession at the Royal Courts of Justice for a senior judge whose wig has seen more rulings than most barristers have had breakfasts. a man whose curls have weathered wars, scandals, and the slow, reluctant modernization of everything except headwear. One major historical fact: judges in Britain don't technically have to retire until 70, though many stayed longer in earlier eras. Retirement ceremonies, while not mandatory, became important rituals in the legal world. There's no champagne,
No cake.
just solemn speeches, soft applause, and one final dignified removal of the wig. You arrive at the grand Gothic building, all spires and stone. The marble echoes with steps and whispers. Barristers gather in small clusters like birds on a wire, each in full robe, full wig, and half interest. The atmosphere is reverent, but not mournful. The judge isn't dying, he's just hanging up the curls. Obscure cultural tidbit: in some rare cases, departing judges would pass their wigs on symbolically, gifting them to protégés or displaying them in chambers like trophies. At least one such wig was eventually auctioned to an eccentric collector who, rumor claims, used it as a lampshade. Inside the hall, the procession begins. The retiring judge enters. His wig, unusually pristine, has clearly been curled just this morning. He looks calm, tired, slightly relieved. You wonder what it's like to carry justice on your head for 40 years and then just not. Thomas watches from the gallery, arms folded, expression unreadable. Maybe he's thinking about his own eventual retirement. Maybe he's still working through yesterday's sandwich. Historians still debate whether these ceremonies served as meaningful transitions or were just another form of legal theater. But the sight of a man bowing for the last time in a full-bottomed wig does feel something. A little sad, a little absurd, a little noble. 3 soft jokes drift from the pews. One junior barrister whispers, "They should bronze it. That wig's ruled on more marriages than Cupid." Another, "Do you think he keeps a smaller one for gardening?" A third says nothing, but quietly sketches the judge in the program with angel wings made of curls. After the speeches, brief, solemn, occasionally humorous, the judge removes his wig and places it on the stand. There's a pause, like the courtroom itself is waiting for a bell that doesn't ring. Then polite applause. Then silence. The crowd files out slowly. Thomas lingers. "So do you?" The judge walks past, nods once to Thomas. "Good arguments last week," he says. Thomas mumbles a thank you. The judge smiles, an actual smile, not the one carved for court, and disappears down the corridor. A new name will replace his on the docket. A new wig will warm the bench. But for now, the chamber is still, and the air smells faintly of orris root and endings. Softly, very softly. Later that afternoon, you find yourself in an archive. It's the kind of place where time sits still, either out of respect or fatigue. The walls are stacked high with volumes that look too tired to be read and too important to be thrown out. You're here because Thomas wants to see something. Something old. Something specific. The clerk, a man who appears to be made of tweed and patience, leads you both down a corridor that smells like dust, ink, and decisions no one quite agreed on. He pulls a volume from the shelf, On the Maintenance and Symbolism of Judicial Attire, 1760 to 1890. Light reading. One major historical fact. The original justification for wigs in court was rooted in the belief that justice must be impersonal. The wig was seen as a mask, concealing emotion, vanity, and the human frailty of the man beneath. Judges were not people. They were law in physical form, or at least they were supposed to be. Thomas flips through the pages, his fingers leaving tiny swirls in the dust. He stops at a sketch, an 1812 courtroom scene. The wigs are massive. The judge's curls practically cascade over the bench. A caption reads, "Appearance of authority in matters of disputed gentry." Obscure cultural tidbit. Some early legal wigs were so elaborate that judges had to lean slightly backward to keep them balanced. A particularly famous incident in 1789 involved a judge who sneezed mid-hearing and sent his wig toppling into the prosecution's tea. The trial was briefly adjourned for dignity retrieval. Thomas chuckles. "It's absurd, isn't it?" he says, not really expecting an answer. All this to look more serious. Historians still debate whether that seriousness was ever truly earned, or simply worn like a borrowed cloak. Legal attire may not have made better decisions, but it certainly slowed them down. And maybe that was the point. The clerk returns with another book, this one smaller, bound in cracked green leather. Inside, a list of barristers who requested exemptions from wig wearing. Religious reasons, medical, or, in one case, a violent allergy to goat hair. All denied. 3 light jokes echo softly in the archive's hush. Thomas holds up a sketch of a wig nearly a foot tall. How did they sit in carriages with these? The clerk, without looking up, they didn't. They arrived. A footnote describes a summer court robe as ventilated wool. Thomas squints at it. Isn't that just holes? You leave the archive just as the lamps begin to buzz on. Outside, the street is quiet. Evening creeps up again, more gentle this time, like it doesn't want to intrude. Thomas tucks the sketch into his satchel. Not for any legal purpose, just something to remember. A visual reminder that the past wasn't always dignified. Sometimes it was powdered and flammable and trying very hard to stay upright. The wind stirs. A street sweeper hums an off-key tune. Somewhere in the distance, a judge sighs into a wig stand. And London prepares for another night under its veil of history. Softly, very softly, morning returns, not with fanfare but with a sort of shrug. The fog has lightened, the cobbles are wet from a reluctant drizzle, and the streets were that washed-out palette only London can manage. Half tea stain, half parchment. You walk once more beside Thomas, this time not toward court, not toward ceremony, but somewhere quieter. The tailor's. Today he's picking up a new robe. The old one, frayed at the cuffs, faintly smelling of courtroom coffee, has earned its rest. Much like the judges and wigs before it, cloth too has a lifespan. And an attitude. One major historical fact. Legal robes in the UK are not generic costumes, but very specific garments. Barristers, solicitors, King's Counsel, and judges each have their own style, their own trim, their own fabric weight. And all of them trace back to the late 1600s, when Parliament decided that solemnity looked best in black and synthetic fur. The tailor's shop is tucked behind Lincoln's Inn Fields, quiet as a whisper, smelling faintly of starch and old velvet. You step inside, and the bell overhead makes the sort of chime that suggests you should be on your best behavior. Thomas exchanges a few pleasantries with the tailor, who regards him like a faded tapestry, worn, familiar, and still somehow regal. He brings out the new robe. It's folded carefully, reverently. The fabric is dense, dark, with just enough give to say reasonable but firm. Obscure cultural tidbit. For centuries, legal robes were dyed with a mixture that included insects, crushed minerals, and in one case, ground-up sea snails. There's no confirmed evidence anyone ever noticed, but it does explain why moths avoided the legal profession. Thomas tries the robe on, adjusts the shoulders, checks the sleeves. It fits a little too well. Feels like it's judging me, he mutters. The tailor nods. It should. Historians still debate whether legal dress maintained public trust, or simply discouraged misbehavior by forcing everyone to sweat through polyester under oath. Either way, few forgot what a courtroom looked like, or how small you felt under those curls. 3 soft jokes linger in the wool-scented air. Thomas peers into the mirror and sighs. I look like I'm about to sentence someone for mispronouncing Latin. The tailor, dry as kindling. Good. It's working. A plaque on the wall reads, Silence in the fitting room. Dignity in the seams. Beneath it, a crooked wig rests on a mannequin head that appears to be frowning. As you leave, Thomas carries the robe like one might carry a fragile heirloom, or a mild curse. The streets are brighter now. A shaft of sunlight even dares to poke through the clouds. You pass by the old courtroom again, its windows blinking sleepily in the morning light. The same goose is on the steps, still honking, still judging. And as you round the final corner, the city exhales. The week of Wigs has passed, but the echoes remain, soft, powdered, and oddly comforting. Now let the curls settle. Let the courtroom hush stretch long and quiet, like the velvet lining of an old robe no one wears anymore. The judges have gone home. The barristers have folded their notes, packed their boxes, and removed their goat-haired crowns with a relieved sigh. London has turned inward again, wrapping itself in fog and stories. The alleyways fade. The cobblestones smooth themselves into silence. The lamplight leans softer, casting halos on puddles that forget their reflections as soon as they form. The air is full of damp parchment and the faint echo of decisions once spoken with too much gravitas and not quite enough caffeine. You rest your thoughts now. Let the weight of centuries soften on your shoulders. The wig, absurd and majestic, rests in its box. The robe hangs quietly in the cupboard. And justice, whatever it meant, whatever it means, sleeps politely powdered and undisturbed. There's no need to remember the details. Let them drift. The powdered curls, the tailor's dry wit, the arguments about fences and goats and tradition. Let them fold into the fabric of sleep, stitched between laughter and old ink. You're not in a courtroom anymore. You're somewhere between history and dreaming, somewhere just past the last page of the archive, in the quiet margin where all stories eventually close their eyes. So breathe slowly, deeper now. Let the shadows lengthen. Let the city hum. The gavel has fallen, the lights have dimmed, and the last curl has found its rest. Sleep well, dear listener, and may your dreams be slightly ridiculous and very well powdered.